Mohsin, welcome back. You've been on the show already. Um, I remember the buzzing of inspiration when I got off the conversation with you. And lots has happened in the meantime. Um, and so I'm curious to hear about your learnings from running gazillions of revive sessions and to dig more into, yeah, your learnings from that, but also the process and of this commitment. For those who haven't listened to the first episode, who are you? And do you call yourself a facilitator?
I do. And let me just start by saying it's such a delight to be back here, to be having this conversation with you. Um, I was looking forward to it because I knew that through the conversation, I'm going to discover something as well along the way. And I think that's the beauty of authentic and real conversations
Mm,
because they give you a peek into your own psyche in some way or another.
yes.
So I am Mohsin, and I am a facilitator who turned into an entrepreneur who runs an ed tech company. And I created a game system called Evivve, which is played by leaders from across the globe. And it's a game system that surfaces authentic behaviors. And it's been a source of inspiration and immense learning for me personally and for the team that works on it and for the participants who experience it.
Yeah. And I think last time we spoke, it was when you just started maybe with Evive.
Yeah, I had made a resolve just about that time that I was going to put the next 5 years into this product, into building this out. And I was at this crossroads of sort of, I'm on this journey now. So let's, you know,
Yeah. And what I find fascinating about your journey, and it's not often that I invite former guests back to the podcast. So you're one of the few. Um, and usually it's when I see a big transformation happening that is worth highlighting because it's so inspiring. And I had Jacques the party scientist on the show a few months ago again, um, because him and you, what I can see is this clear commitment to the one thing that you stand for and you follow it no matter what. And I just want to highlight that and celebrate it and also speak out maybe the word of inspiration to everyone out there that if you make the commitment and the decision to devote your life to something for the next 5 years, there's a high chance that you will be successful with it.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a choice you make every day, you know, and it's not one that you've made 5 years ago and that choice is going to play out for you because every day we face challenges. Every day you will question whether it's the right choice and whether you're on the right path. And I think when you feel that feeling, it's telling you something
Mm,
because it's asking you to course correct. It's not asking you to quit. I don't think that's what that voice inside is asking of you. It's asking you to course correct.
I love that distinction. Mhm. What was your purpose back then, and what's your purpose with Evive or with your business right now?
I love that question. The purpose has remained the same, and the purpose has deepened, if anything, and has developed more clarity and perspective for me, a lot more compassion for myself before anyone else.
Mm,
And the purpose has been about human growth, seeing that people can thrive and they can do incredible things when they gain control of their mindset, when
mm,
they're able to understand the process that their mind is moving through and the dysfunctionalities that sometimes emerge that we feel so encumbered by at
Mm.
times.
And then the game you developed would help then the players to gain awareness of their mindset and what's in the way? Or how does the purpose link to the tool you're using?
Yeah, so I started with this core premise, this understanding that if people knew the consequence of their choices, they would make better choices.
Mm,
And foundationally, I think everybody wants to do well. Everybody wants to excel and and impress their bosses, get the next promotion, live a happy, healthy life. And the challenge often is that they don't fully come in touch with the impact of the micro choices that they might be making. And when we are able to see that, we can make better choices. And the game does exactly that. It's designed to simulate an out of the world context situation in a year-long quote unquote project that you're working with 5 or 10 other people who you might be working with in your teams otherwise as well. But remove the work pressure and the work context, and you create a psychologically safe container for people to share their shortcomings and their challenges. And in that process, you're uncovering your own blind spots, you're helping others uncover theirs. And through dialogue and through conversation, you're able to arrive at new insights and new understandings of what are the consequences of the choices that you were making.
mm. Where basically the choices of the game are only mirroring what we would do in real life. Reminds me of the saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything.
100%.
Yeah. And what I love about that, I became a big fan of radical honesty and did a workshop on that and see how speaking out the impact of something that has on us immediately really avoids bigger bigger conflict or problems. And I can see the difficulty to implement that in a professional context where we are simply not used to this level of directness and honesty, depending on the culture, but usually not. So
Yeah.
to have a game, hmm?
The risk is too high.
Yeah. Although, if people, and then again, this comes back to what you beautifully said, if only we knew the positive consequences of taking this small risk that seems like a big risk, then we would do it more often. So, how do you create this psychologically safe container through the game where people can really then speak out and confront their blind spots? Because I think that's incredibly vulnerable. Like we have blind spots for good reasons. It's our brain basically protecting us from seeing what might harm us, right?
Yeah. I think context shifting is really important there. A lot of my clients, they talk to me about simulations. And, when I present Evivve to them, they often say, can we get this in our works context?
Mm.
We do manufacturing, so can we get a game for manufacturing? And I'm like, that's precisely the point, which is because you are experts in what you do, you know? And that's why we've got to remove the context and give you a brand new context, one in which you don't know right from wrong. You're choosing from a sea of gray. And when you're choosing from a sea of gray, you don't know. So you're relying on your best judgment.
Mm.
And that's going to tell something about how you think, how you show up, and what choices you make.
And then it's this totally new context that also removes prejudice or pressure on how we have to behave, and this creates a safety, or how do you do that?
Yeah, certainly. That's a big part of what creates the safety. It's also when you are not the only one who doesn't have all the answers. And when you
Mm.
look around the room and you see others are also struggling and others are also, fumbling and scrambling with various elements of the game.
This makes so much sense and just reminds me of the never done before context. Back then, unconsciously, we created the space where nobody's an expert because everyone is doing something for the first time, and hence it creates psychological safety because we're in this together. Huh, thank you. Light bulb moment already after 10 minutes. And how many of those sessions, just to put it into perspective and also to give the audience an idea of the magnitude of learning that you're and data you're sitting on. How many
Uh,
of those sessions have you run?
so I've run over 1,000 of them, and between me and the facilitators, over 100 facilitators have run close to over 20,000 game containers of Evivve.
20,000 game containers, all with teams or groups of individuals. What has been the most surprising learning when you looked at, because at some point and I'm building up the momentum and the curiosity, right? So um, at some point I know that you sat down to look at all the data to make sense out of it. What was the most surprising?
I think the biggest surprise from analyzing this, sometime last year I did this and I said, what have we done? What did we do? And it was a stroke of inspiration through which Evivve happened. And last year felt like the right time for me to go back to the drawing board and really assess and look at everything. And one of the most surprising things that have emerged from it is this model called the AFER model. And within that, there are even more surprises. And one of them was directly linked to how we deal with catastrophes and how we deal with situations that cause us to stop and cause us to pause, because the game has these natural disasters inbuilt within
Mhm.
the experience. And when we looked at the data, we found that people made significant pivots and shifts in their approaches during a disaster.
Mm. And what does that mean?
It means that they were given the space and the time, forcibly so, to ponder their choices, because until that point, they were too busy in the action mode doing things. And that's the last R of AFER, which is the reflective nature of what provides us time and space to think and to change our approach and do something differently. We saw that happening in real life as well through the pandemic.
Mm.
A lot of people changed what they were doing and shifted.
So basically, a disaster is an opportunity or a catalyst for change
Yeah.
and hopefully
And we
for the
were
better.
precisely,
We never know.
we were able to see that play out in the game. We did not expect that.
Interesting. And what was the role of the leader versus the group? Because, and what have you learned through that about leadership?
So much that leaders are able to zoom out quickly and zoom in quickly as well. And this is directly connected with the first R of AFRO, which is realization. So leaders lead themselves and support realizations for the team to
Mhm.
help make sense of what's going on. If we
Mm.
don't have a semblance of what's going on, we can be confused and go in many different directions. And we've seen great leaders step up in those moments and give clarity. It doesn't always mean that they have the answers, They don't. They're like you and I, they're like anybody else. They just have the willingness and the courage to ask the right questions.
That is fascinating. And before I ask you to walk us through the rest of the acronyms of your model, um, I imagine that it happened that someone would step into this leadership role who is de facto not the leader of the team. So, how would you, or how do groups in maybe if a generalization is possible, handle the situation where apparently the formal legal leader is maybe not the best person in that role?
That's a very tricky one because you're looking at cultural nuances,
Mm,
you're looking at organizational hierarchy, dynamics between people, ego, age, all of these things play a role. But the one thing we've seen time and again is that great teams and good leaders, those legal quote unquote leaders, make room for rising stars when they see people are getting something. And that's the world we live in today. We live in such a dynamic world and things are changing all the time. BANI, as the acronym, is the new VUCA.
mhm. That's
And
brittle, anxious, non-linear, and
incomprehensible.
incomprehensive. Yeah.
So we're dealing with this really different kind of world. And in that, there will be new leaders. There will be new people who get it, who get what's going on, and giving them the room and the space to articulate and to share becomes so important. And I think one of the things that's happening is this line between a leader and the follower is diminishing. It's
Mm,
graying out significantly because we're seeing people step in momentarily to a leadership role, do the thing that they needed to do, and then step back,
mm.
thereby creating room for a different kind of leader to lead and solve a different kind of problem that the team may be facing.
Sounds like agile leadership.
Very much so.
Very interesting. And it also sounds as if different organizational structures and models would be required for that. If the
Yeah.
leadership role is rather a distributed one
Yeah.
than a fixed one.
And different ways of looking at what leadership looks like and how it shows up. Different kinds of affordances that organizations need to now make available for teams, for those rising stars to emerge, solve critical problems, because we won't always have all the answers.
Mm. Especially nowadays. Well, sometimes it seems as if we have too many answers, but we don't have the right questions. Um, and I then wonder, I would be curious from a facilitation point of view, when teams are playing these games and then at some point I would think that it's so in your face that you cannot ignore it. So you see the results, you see what has happened. And with you, I mean the team or the players. How much or how little guidance do you give for the debriefing um, to create, I would say, ownership?
Yeah, it's it's really about realizations, you know. The I feel that every industry has a certain thing that they're trying to drive as as an outcome. And I believe deeply that the learning industry's outcome that we haven't fully acknowledged is one of creating realizations for people. That when we recognize that when people arrive at realizations that are rooted in truth and
Hmm.
not in delusion,
Hmm.
but in objectivity, we will see shifts happen. So a big part of how much a facilitator guides that debrief is on what is the kind of realization we want the individual and the team to arrive at. Because in a single Evivve game, you'll see hundreds of behaviors emerge, and not all battles are worth fighting.
Mm, yeah. And it's also a dangerous game to play because the more realizations, these deeply rooted realizations, authentic realizations you have, the less of control you have over the direction
Yeah.
um, that the people, the teams, the leaders will go. Um, yeah. Strict hierarchy is no longer, but would not support that kind of development, I would assume.
Yeah, it would be hindering
Yeah.
for movement, you
Yeah.
know. If you come in, we've seen both sides of the thing. So people often play Evivve multiple times,
Mm,
and and we see this play out so much. In the first time that they play the game, it's chaos, it's anarchy. Everybody is free for all, everybody's just doing their own thing, and a lot of dysfunctionalities emerge. The tendency for teams to come out of this kind of anarchy is to go towards immense control.
hmm
And that's the nature of what it is like to be human, which is overcorrection. That's what we do, right? We overcorrect and end up on the other side of control. And in doing that, we prevent autonomy. So great teams are able to balance control and autonomy in a really beautiful sort of a dance. And when you
mm,
watch an Evivve game, this is one of the things that I tell teams that play the game, is that watch yourself play it. That is going to be far greater a lesson than anything that I or any other facilitator can tell you, because you're going to come in touch with your own realities.
and coping strategies.
Yes.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yes, fascinating. I'm about to go on a massive tangent and I will not do that. I will park it. Maybe we have time another time. Um, so you sit down with all the data and then you came up with a model. Tell us more about this model. We already had the realizations, which is 1 hour.
We've got the 2 hours down, so that's good. Yeah. Uh, so Affer was a, or is a growing understanding. And when I discovered it sometime last year, I knew that I didn't want to just keep it to myself.
Mm,
So I started writing about it just to make sense for myself of what this is. And what was really fascinating was that I started seeing that there was a pattern in how our brains were responding to different kind of stimuli. And there was always an objective. And I think my game design skill and capability came in very handy because I was able to understand this whole concept of payoff. Because each of us is expecting a certain payoff from any action that we do. You take something as simple as picking a Netflix show to watch, you're expecting a certain payoff
hmm
from that endeavor. And if you don't get that payoff within the first 10 minutes, we abandon the show.
Yeah.
And that time of how much time we will give is what we call consideration spans.
hmm
So the truth and reality is that our attention spans are not diminishing. We've actually had greater attention spans than we've ever had. What's
Mm.
diminishing is our consideration span. How much time do we spend evaluating whether something is worth our time or not?
And I wonder whether this, and maybe you have an answer, whether this is related to the opportunity costs, because we have so much more choice today. So the more time I'm spending on a suboptimal choice, the more costly basically this suboptimal choice is, because with this time I could have done something else.
And that nagging thing is always in the back of our heads, especially with this,
FOMO.
yeah, FOMO, this hyper toxic productivity world that we live in, forcing us to always do and do and do and make the most of everything, every moment of our lives that we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. It's very fascinating. I will park some of these ideas as I'm writing a book on professionalism. It's very interesting stuff on what I'm working on. Okay, so AFR, before you walk us through the acronyms of AFR, what I observe, and I find this beautiful, is, if I may mirror this back to you, um, listening to you as you speak about AFR, sounds um, as if you found a species that is maybe extinct or that's very rare that nobody has found before. So you speak of this phenomenon as something that is living and that is existing, and that you're now devoting your time to help more people see it.
Yes, I feel that way.
Mm.
I also don't think I was the first one, though. And uh, this is a very old practice. And this came up from my last Vipassana,
Mhm.
actually, understanding that the Buddha has talked about this,
Mm.
of how our senses make contact with an object and therefore create an emotion.
Mhm.
From that emotion, we feel something. When we feel something, we think something. When
Mhm.
we think something, we do take an action. We act on it.
Yeah.
And when we act on it, there's a certain realization, whether that action, that choice, and that outcome was favorable or not.
Yes. So yes to all of that. And I'm then curious about the learning loop, also linked to the consideration span. So the more we learn, the faster or the smaller gets the consideration span, maybe, I would assume.
Because you know more, right? And
Yeah,
you're able to judge things faster,
yeah.
whether this is useful for me, this is not useful for me. You gain a deeper understanding of what you're looking for. So you start to weed out options, and this can create a lot of bias as well.
I was about to say that it can be very dangerous, the expert bias. So we think that we understand and we know and can consider all the options and then become blinded. Mm. Okay, Afar.
So the starting point is activation. The A of AFER is activation, which in the human experience is a felt experience. It's an emotion. And my study in neuroscience tells us, and having observed thousands of games of Evivve, tells us that emotions are highly complex data sets that we don't fully understand.
Mhm.
So when you feel something inside you that's jarring, that doesn't sit well with you, it's a really complex piece of data. And so we need to sit with that and understand, what is that data telling us before we act on it.
Assuming that we actually have the ability to feel it, because that was one of my realizations with Vipassana, is we have unlearned feeling our emotions, and
So
hence we replace them by numbing. And so, yeah.
so true. And that's the way that our generation has dealt with pain and discomfort. Oh, it's
Mm.
painful. Here, take a med,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
We can solve that. We can get rid of that. That's not what you want. Take this medicine and it's going to fix it.
Mm.
Instead of going to the root of the issue or the problem. And you're making such an interesting point about we have the ability to feel it. I was talking to someone not too long ago, and they were telling me about, having given birth multiple times. And he said the first time you don't know what the hell is going on. Second time is when you actually feel the pain. Now, I've never given birth. I don't know. But from what they're telling me, it makes a lot of sense because your body is now able to sense things that were blocked and numbed earlier, first time out.
Yes. And there's something like this anticipation. Our brain is very good in predicting what it will be and then starts acting upon it, even though it's not felt yet. And I'm thinking of studies that show that um, anticipating an alcoholic drink has an effect on people that they already start feeling drunk or acting drunk. Similar studies when people observe, so there's a hologram of their hand, um, and then they see a hammer smashing on that hand that is not their hand, they would actually experience pain because their brain predicts a painful experience.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So,
we went into the phantom limb
yes,
study as well, where people would, their arms would be amputated, they would
yes,
feel an itch in an
yes,
arm that doesn't exist. And because
exactly.
the mental cognitive network is still going that far. In
Yeah.
your mind's eye, that hand still exists. So the way they would fix that is to put a mirror and itch the other hand and make you see as though you're itching the hand that was in the mirror.
And then it also then calms down
No.
instead of creating a frustration that the hand is not. That is so smart. Our
And that's
brain is,
it,
yeah.
it, it it's complex. It blows me away. And that's the thing that I find so fascinating, that the more I study it, the more I realize how little I actually know.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, so it all starts with activation. And then in the context of Evivve or team building, it's what would be the activation? Is it to observe our own behavior or the frustration that the game is not going as we expected?
I would say activation has two aspects to it. First, we've got to cross the gatekeeper, the consideration. Is this worth my time?
Hmm.
Once we cross that gatekeeper, consideration is taken care of. There are two things that facilitate meaningful activation. The first is understanding the problem. What is the problem at hand? Do I get it? Does it make sense to me? If it's too small, it's petty. I don't care. If it's too big, it's overwhelming. I still don't care because it's easier for me to not care, like global politics, right?
Hmm.
Or climate change. So big. It's so hard to wrap our heads around that. And so many people have resigned as a result of that. I've got a dear friend who works in climate change and in sustainable um, living and climate, dealing with climate. And she says that it's such a sad industry to be a
Mm.
part of because you have this constant feeling of hopelessness. Because while you understand the problem, you don't have as much agency to
Hmm.
do about it. And that's the second factor of what activates effectively. So you've got to show the problem and you've got to give the agency to do something about it.
Yeah. Which then reminds me of the importance of clarifying the purpose whenever we are in the sphere of andragogy, adult education, and facilitation. So be clear on the purpose, so that we can then activate the minds.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And sometimes you want to activate frustration. Sometimes you want to activate excitement. Sometimes you want to activate dissatisfaction of some
Mm.
sort, and you want to see what emerges through that. But the right activation is so important. And this is something that, as I went back to look at some of the models that existed, like Cole's learning cycle, brilliant model, right?
Hmm.
Often missed this critical element of emotion. we end up judging all participants who go through a learning experience, whether it's a digital one or a physical classroom facilitated experience, across a similar scale to say that all of them were equally excited to be there.
Mm.
Not the
Mm.
case.
Yeah.
So, this activation, bringing that up, because somebody could be activated from a very fearful place and they would be thinking and doing very different things
Hmm.
than what you want them to do.
Yeah. So would you then say that it's a matter of priming to make sure that you bring or ground the group in a similar experience of activation, whether it is from fear or excitement or frustration or joy?
Yeah, understanding what your participants need and showing them the problem and giving them the agency to do something about it
Hmm.
becomes a meaningful way of activating, especially for learning containers. Now,
Hmm.
activation is happening whether you like it or not. With every moment of our lives, the moment our senses make contact with something, for example, I grab this mug, if it's too hot, I'm activated with a feeling of pain.
Hmm.
And my thought is, I don't want this, so I want to put it away. And that's the action that I will take, right? So activation is happening whether we like it or not. But when we're facilitating learning containers and we're creating environments in which we want those environments to be conducive for change, we want to activate mindfully and meaningfully.
Mm. Yeah,
And
this makes.
once the brain is successfully activated, meaningfully activated, you create this natural process within the brain. And the next step is forecasting. So the
Hmm.
mind then goes into forecasting, which is whatever emotion I've been activated on. If it's more of something that I want, then I'm forecasting how can I get more of that? If it's less of something that I want, how can I get less of that? And so your brain goes into, imagine this wheel of emotions,
Hmm.
right? And it's a wheel literally with all these emotions everywhere. And each one leads you to a different kind of forecasting that you will do. So you're feeling fearful, you'll be forecasting in that direction. You're feeling excited, you're going to forecast in that direction. You're feeling bored, you're going to forecast in that direction.
Mm. And I assume that is very different for every human being because our brain's forecasting is a function of our past experiences.
Precisely. Precisely. And you could be forecasting in a direction that's counterproductive to you
Hmm.
without realizing that you're doing that.
Because
Because
our brain wants to protect us.
exactly, the more we forecast something, even if we don't want it, that is the thing that our brain relies on as a method to get to the next stage,
Yeah.
which is experimentation.
So if the forecasting is basically trigger, a triggered outcome of the activation, and we can control in air quotes the activation to some extent.
Some
Can
extent.
try to. We can
We can try.
we can be. What about the forecasting? Is there anything we can do in order to facilitate the forecasting in a desirable direction?
Yeah. We found that forecasting happens on a spectrum as well, much like activation does. On a wheel, you look at hyperactivation when you're when you're feeling too many emotions, you can get hyperactivated, or hypoactivated when you're not feeling excited enough, so you disengage. Similarly, forecasting also works on two spectrums. One spectrum, and both of these are linked to our tendencies, our habitual tendencies of what we fall back on as tried and tested ways that we've done things in the past that we rely on. These are like our go-tos. They work. We know it works.
Hmm.
So the forecasting spectrums are short-term and long-term.
Hmm.
So we forecast either short-term or long-term or both, depending on the depth of your ability to forecast. The other forecasting spectrum is cautionary and optimism.
Mm. Mhm.
So we will forecast cautious things. So I think you're seeing the connection here. Emotions like fear will naturally cause us to forecast towards the cautious side of things, perhaps even towards the short term side of things. Whereas the happy emotions may cause us to forecast more on the optimistic side of things as well. Then on top of that, there's also your layer of your tendencies of what you normally go into. Like we've met people who are like glass half full people, right? Or glass half empty people, or glass full people. We've met all of those kinds of people. And that's an indication of the nature of your forecast as well.
Mm. Yes. It, I'm still processing. I think it's fascinating, and I now see the relevance of the psychological safety to set the container beforehand, because otherwise the forecasting will go sideways. If we don't feel safe, we might also, our brain might interpret something exciting into fearful, and then we forecast, and then we put up all these kind of shields to protect ourselves. Um, and I see the relevance for grounding, or kind of managing our
Yeah,
nervous system regulation, the importance of that,
yeah,
so that our brain can actually do a realistic forecasting, or the most realistic that's
uh-huh.
available to it.
Yeah, spot on. And it's easy to think that after is a linear process. It's not, because our brain is deeply complex. This is just a way of articulating it.
Mm,
But in reality, our brain is moving through after cycles in micro and nanoseconds,
mhm,
and it's arriving at realizations that it's making and course correcting instantaneously
mhm,
in the very moment. And so we've got to, as facilitators, we're seeing somebody getting derailed or getting hyperactivated. We've got to first be able to recognize that that's happening for an individual. And then we've got to have the ability and the nuance to intervene and check the realizations they're arriving at, adjust the realizations so that they can be activated right again.
mm. Yeah, fascinating. What I loved that you mentioned the pace, how quickly this happens. And I was thinking of a stupid example, like I see a glass of water next to me. Am I having this glass of water? Yes or no? So all of this is happening while we are having a conversation. When I now think of a learning or a workshop environment where suddenly everyone gets up to get a glass of water, to go to the toilet, what is actually happening? Um, Something is triggered, they see it, they might want to escape an uncomfortable moment. And then the potential gain from having water or going to the toilet is higher than experiencing whatever happens in the room. Yeah.
So very true. And this is playing out every day, every moment
Yeah.
of our lives.
Yeah. So we have the activation, we have the forecasting.
Mhm.
What comes next?
Once the brain has done enough forecasting, it wants to move to the next natural step that it wants to. This goes back to the phantom limb example that we were talking about, right? You will continue to feel the itch because your brain has forecasted that already. Now, the downside of not having a limb is that you can't do anything about it. Yet, the brain needs experimentation in order to reach the next stage, which is realization.
Hmm.
And experimentation is the very act of doing the forecast, the thing that you thought about, bringing that to life. And that action has parameters as well for what facilitators need to look out for in order to create safe spaces for meaningful experimentation.
So experimentation and action, is it the same step?
Yes.
Yeah.
So activation leads to forecasting, which naturally causes us to experiment. And so a simple way of, from the human experience standpoint, viewing this is the activation is the emotion or the feeling. The forecasting is the thinking.
Mm-hmm.
The experimentation is the doing. The realization is the sense making.
Mm-hmm.
And the reflection is the integration.
Mm. Yeah. Where does the body sits in all of that? Because we were talking about Vipassana, um, where the emotions before we, so one way to sense the emotions, the activation is through the body.
Mm.
And it's only then that the brain makes sense of that.
Yeah, yeah. The body plays a significant role in all of this because we feel these emotions in our body. They are they're manifesting in the body. There's a whole line of study that talks about how physical pain manifests itself in different parts of our body
Mm-hmm.
because it's connected to either some kind of emotional suffering or some kind of psychosomatic challenges that we might be dealing with, and it shows up in the body.
Mm.
So recognizing that becomes a really important part of tempering and balancing, finding your grounding again when you've been hyperactivated in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's fascinating hearing you talk about this model in the context of facilitation, because I now see all the facilitation qualities or tasks of to how to regulate the activation, then the um, forecasting. Um, I also see a role for co-regulation. So if the facilitator is overstimulated, overactivated, this has an impact on the group and will be more difficult to then calm down or co-regulate.
Yeah, yeah,
So if there needs to be an action or space for experimentation, um, how do you deal with different things actually? One is it might be a false positive. So the forecasting is either forecasting something that's clearly wrong, like the inexisting limb, or it could be a stress response, like I am feeling discomfort in my body. What am I doing? I'm grabbing my phone, right? I'm opening another tab because it feels comfortable, familiar, whatever. Um, so that's one. How do you deal with experimentation to avoid the, for no better use of a term? Um, and then on another layer, that you have groups. Everyone has a different way of experimentation and needs.
yeah, yeah. You're making such a critical point because this has been the area of my work for the last 10 years. You know, I started with an experimentation container. That was what Evivve's goal originally was, which was going back to solving organizational challenges of something like silos, you know, and the problem statement would sound something like, our leaders know they need to collaborate, but they don't.
Mm,
And so clearly something inside is happening. It's not a necessarily a skill issue, it's a will issue
mhm,
that we're trying to solve here. And what we found through the work is that there are certain parameters that facilitators can use to create a meaningful experimentation space, which I earlier called practice spaces. I remember talking to you about it
Mm-hmm.
at one point as well. And there are four elements. Now, of course, it's not perfect. We're going to learn and we're going to keep making it better. But so far, we found out that there are four elements that we need to be watchful of to facilitate meaningful experimentation for a neurodiverse group of people. And we're all neurodiverse in some way or another, right? And
Just by
the
the
first,
fact that everyone's brain functions differently in this group, even if them individually are not on the neurodiverse spectrum. Hmm.
precisely,
Hmm.
precisely. And to say that different people will have different affinities. Some have a higher affinity for activation, some have a higher affinity to forecast, therefore they overthink, some have a higher affinity to experiment, some have a higher affinity to realize, some have a lower affinity to realize, therefore they keep making the same mistakes and don't learn anything,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
right? But the four elements of what makes a meaningful experimentation environment, at the very bedrock of it is psychological safety. So, facilitators spend a lot of time thinking about how we create psychological safety. So I'm not going to get into that, but it's essential. It is like the air that you need to breathe. Without it, nothing else is going to
Hmm.
happen. The other element of experimentation is a solo and group component where they gain some amount of agency by taking actions on their own in their
Mm.
own
Hmm.
space and balancing that with group interaction. So even if they don't have the opportunity to express themselves in the group, that experimentation can be channeled, that energy can still be channeled into a solo interaction. And that gives them more agency and more control to then step into the group. So a balance between group and solo activities is the second piece we
Hmm.
found to be deeply essential. The third element is to have non-linear pathways, which means that people should be able to take multiple pathways towards the goal that they want. So, not a restricted environment where you can only do this. And I think facilitation as a profession and as a line of work lends itself significantly to creating non-linear pathways for participants to engage.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the
Because we
last,
know that we cannot control it anyway. Yeah.
exactly,
Hmm.
because you know you can't control it, and because you know that everybody's going to have their own way of
Yeah.
reaching that goal, and
Yeah.
that many a times it'll be better than what you or me could come up with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the last element is non binary outcomes, that the outcome that gets produced from your experimentation is not right nor wrong. It's a sea of gray, and it must support non-binary outcomes. Many
Mm.
a times, simulations and experimentation containers have finite endings
Hmm.
that say either you won or you lost.
Hmm.
Very few of them are able to work with this gray, which is where we spend the bulk of our human lives in the gray.
Yeah. That that as such is fascinating, because there's a frustration attached to the non-binary outcome, because we get our dopamine high from yes, I won. Um, Thank you for walking us through these four components. What somehow came up for me is the realization how relevant this is for a leader. So all of this a leader wearing the facilitator hat, how to enable and maintain a healthy activation in their team, how to make sure that their team is in a space and the container to have the correct forecasting or the healthy forecasting, um, and the space for experimentation, where they can have autonomy and group work. Um, Collaborate, which also then adjusts to the different personality types of introversion, extroversion, how our brain functions and thrives. And the last point about the non-binary outcome then made me realize that it is a model for knowledge work leaders, where by definition there is no binary outcome in the work that knowledge workers are doing, as opposed to a manufacturing work where it's either it works, the piece, or it doesn't. It's either correct or it's false. Um, and then the model does not apply because this element is missing and might then be maybe readjusted. Um,
Yeah. So one of the things that we look out for when people are experimenting is also the nature of their experimentation. You know, how far do they go? How much psychological safety do they need?
mm,
Different people have different degrees of psychological. Many people bring psychological safety with themselves. Some need it externally. And how much do you experiment? To what strategies do you play with? How far do you go with seeing your experiment through? At what point do you abandon your experiment and try a different way as well? Do you stay stuck? And one of the things we do while playing an Evivve game is to disable a player as they're playing. Is sadistic as hell, I know, but we disable a player and we want to see where their agency lies. And we've seen two types of reactions come out of that. One is a reaction of resigning, where they put the device away and they say, I can't do anything. I'm done. You know? Or the other, putting the device away and saying, all right, this is not working right now. What can I do here? How can I help the team communicate better? I'm seeing that there are some loopholes, there are some challenges that the team is facing. How can I step in now? And the question we often ask participants is, where is your power? Is it in the device or is it
mhm.
here?
Oh, yeah, beautiful. And then how to create agency and autonomy if structurally, formally, you have none, can be a very empowering thing. And it says a lot about, I guess, about the personality type and the culture of the team, how they would react to that. Mm, juicy. Okay, so that was an action piece.
So once you've acted, right, this is the whole thing. This is what you're after. You're after a realization. Was that good for me? Was that bad for me? You know, when we finish this podcast, inherently, we're both going to spend maybe a fraction of our some seconds going into, was that good? Yeah,
Mhm.
it was good. And that realization is so important for us because that realization helps us to come in touch with a summary of that experience, of that after cycle so far. Because we use summaries to make sense of our past. We summarize things so that it's easy to access it and easy to reference it over time.
And then to adjust the forecasting for the next time. That's where the learning happens. I was actually, that's a very small tangent because we're running out of time. I cannot believe it. Um, I read a book about the human brain. And I somehow knew it before, but it was reminded by how wrong our memory is.
Yeah.
About 60% of what we imagine has happened in the past in a specific moment, even if it's just 5 minutes ago, is absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
And
But there's
assuming that everyone remembers something different And they're all wrong, but then they're fighting about it. Um, then makes it very important to actually align on this realization to make sense together. Is this the last R?
You got it. And that's so critical, isn't it? Because if we are making different sense of our reality, we are going to be activated differently. We're going to be forecasting differently. We're going to be experimenting differently. And therefore, we're going to arrive at yet new and even more different realizations.
Mm-hmm.
So, this realization element is what our brain is looking for. And the really bizarre and incredibly surprising thing, which is also not surprising when you think about it, is that our brain will do everything in its power to fill the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And the stuff that it fills the gaps with is your core psyche. This is your, what we call in neurological terms, the DMN, the default mode network, which is from which we operate our
Mm.
core way of thinking. So we'll fill that with assumptions as placeholders. And the challenge is when we don't check those assumptions, when we don't, even with new information. And that's why reflection is so important. But our brain will consciously let go of the reflection component because it's got the answer already and move right back into activation. And this is why people don't meditate. This is why people don't spend time in solitude and in reflecting about their choices. Also, because it's hard, it's expensive,
Could be painful.
very.
Mm.
It challenges you. And what our brain is doing through the realization process is it's taking our existing mental model and it's viewing the reality and it's trying to assimilate, it's trying to sense make. And this is why when we have traumatic experiences where the current reality, maybe the loss of somebody, doesn't fit with your existing mental model, we experience trauma.
Mm.
We deal with grief. Many a times we put it in a box, lock it up, put that in another box, and not access it.
Yes.
So some of our research is actually telling us also that trauma can limit learning. It can limit access to experience that could be instrumental in your growth and in your learning.
Which makes total sense because if it's locked up in a box, because it's painful, don't touch it, this kind of blind spot avoidance will be a main component of the filling the gap algorithm. Yeah. Fascinating. So you published a paper about that, and we'll put the link in the show notes so that everyone can read about it in their own time. Um, I hope that you're working on a book that
I
might be
am.
more accessible than an academic paper.
Yeah. Yeah,
Great.
I am.
Beautiful. Where are you heading then next? With this, what is there still to learn?
So much. There's so much to learn. With the AFRA model, it's given us a framework of how to think about thinking. It's a metacognition tool, just like meditation is, because when we enter a state of meditation or any kind of container through which we can learn and we can view ourselves, we're able to see what changes we need to make. It brings the ownership to ourselves. A future I see is one where we evaluate cognitive capacity through something like AFRA. that is able to indicate an individual's affinity and fit that to the kind of affinity that a job role might require.
Mm.
That a certain role requires a high activation, a certain role requires a high experimentation. We
Mm.
rely on our natural tendencies of what we have to be able to better fit ourselves into roles and be happier,
Mm.
living healthier as a result.
Love that. Curious. Looking back at 20,000 sessions run between you and 100 associates by now. Um, what advice would you give your younger self when you just got started?
Love that question. What advice would I give my younger self? I recently came in touch with this realization that it's not about me. And if I could meet my younger self, one that would trust me, the future self, I would tell him something along those lines that keep going and take it easy because I have made it so hard for myself at times. And I think that would be the advice I would give myself
Mm. How would you make it then easier?
by not making it about me.
Um, just curious, if I may, because the not making it about you, um, I can interpret this in two directions, and I would be curious. One is it's not personal, so all the setbacks, all the criticism, not to take it personally. The other direction is it's not about you in terms of purpose. It's bigger than you. You're not doing it for your fame. You're doing it for humanity.
I would say both, but the thing that I really struggled with wasn't even about criticism. It could be the smallest things, you know. I wrote a LinkedIn post and only got 2 likes.
Mm.
I mean, I would beat myself up about that for a while. And to know that there are many factors at play,
Mm.
either enable or disable that. Just having objectivity, not so much out of some delusional state of mind, just having objectivity about myself and about what that actually means and not the meaning that I'm giving it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because everyone is activated by different things, and you're to react to your LinkedIn post or not. Yeah, fascinating. I can see so many applications of the model.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm surprised the ways in which it supports organic growth. We're seeing that birds and animals and things also have their after cycles.
Hmm.
They too are moving through the after process. And this has led me to recognize a deep truth that's sort of the undercurrent of what we are calling AI. There's this whole buzz about artificial intelligence. And we think that artificial intelligence is the next plane of growth for consciousness. And I think a big part of that is not just going to be artificial intelligence, it's actually going to be recognizing alternate intelligence. That there can be an intelligence that is equally, if not meaningful, just as meaningful as yours, yet it's different. It's alternate intelligence.
Mm. Fascinating how this would look like.
I'm keen to explore it. I don't know
Yes.
what it's going to lead to, but I'm very keen to explore it. And the more I meet people, the more I understand this. I look at nature. I spend a lot of time in nature. I've left the city now. So it's nice to be looking at organic growth and observing what's happening through this and how plants and birds and bees are responding,
Hmm.
how they are realizing certain things and how they are getting activated and how they are forecasting and therefore experimenting, and the changes they're making is also their mental model and
Yeah.
intelligence.
Yeah. And then helps us to reflect on what is so deeply rooted in our instincts that we share with other living organisms. With all this wisdom and knowledge, what remains your facilitation challenge?
What remains my facilitation challenge? Over empathizing continues to be, you know, having uh, grown up as the elder sibling in the household and, entrusted with so much responsibility, um, that becomes something that's ingrained and a key part of myself. And so a big part of my facilitation struggle continues to be where I hold myself back from providing answers and support when people need to uncover that for themselves because they need to arrive at that, not me doing it for them.
Resonates so much. And I think, yeah, and I assume for many facilitators, parents, leaders, just because we see it doesn't mean anything for the group.
That because their realizations are the most important things to them. And our realizations for them would be their judgments. They would
Mm,
be judgments on them.
yeah, yeah, always. And we never know. We cannot forecast the impact we have on others with our actions. That's where we started. Mohsin, thank you so much for this rich and thought-provoking conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for asking with such curiosity and intent. I appreciate that very much.
And I will put all the links to where the audience can find you in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you.